All right, everyone. It is just about time for us to get started here. I'm sure a few more people will keep funneling in over the next couple of minutes, but we'll go ahead and dive in here. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. My name is Thayer Lucian. I'm a senior business analyst at Above the Fray Design, and I will be moderating this panel. Today's topic is the realities of Magento extension development with Travis Bernard. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to him in a moment here. Just a friendly reminder that you can all use the chat feature to communicate and collaborate with the other attendees. If you have any technical problems or issues, feel free to put those in the chat as well, and I'll be able to see those and help you out if I can. With any technical issues that are occurring. We will have some Q&A at the end of this session as well. So do keep that in mind. We'll make sure we get those questions addressed. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Travis.
Hey, thank you. Good to see everyone here. Glad to be here. Let me get my slides up. All right, cool. I think everyone can see that. So yeah, we're talking about realities of Magento extension development. Just a little context for this presentation. Some of you maybe follow me on Twitter. I don't know why all of you would, but I was kind of having an open, a little bit of a rant, if we're being honest, a little bit of a discussion about some of the upgrade frictions we were having when we moved our extension onto Magento 2.4.4. And I got reached out to by Sonia with the association and said, hey, would you like to share your experience with that move? And we kind of riffed on that and worked on it a little bit. And we kind of decided, well, why don't we talk about kind of the reality of what it means to work on Magento as an extension developer, as opposed to maybe some of the dream scenario that we all kind of wish we had to work with. So that's kind of the point of this talk. By way of a very fast introduction, my name is Travis Bernard. I'm a technical lead at Shipper HQ. I've been working in Magento for about 9 years in total. I've been with Shipper HQ for going on 5. And if you ever need to find a watermelon at the supermarket, I can always get the perfect watermelon out of the batch. I don't know why. I don't like watermelon that much, but I'm good at it for some reason. Just to kind of set the stage, you know, I said that this talk was kind of born out of a Twitter thread in which I was expressing some frustrations and trying to get help from the community. So I want to kind of lay down what to expect from this talk. I do want this presentation to be real talk. I want it to be true to life and what we face. I want it to be pragmatic, but I also want it to be focused on achievable solutions. And what I don't want this talk to be is to become a complaint session. And by no means am I saying that this is a silver bullet to all of the problems that may come your way in your business when you're working with Magento. There is no such thing. We wouldn't want it if we had it. So yeah, just to note, we're going to try and keep the conversation positive. We're going to try and keep everything positive and happy in the chat. And we're going to try and talk real about things that really come up, but focus on solving those things and moving forward. So to get started, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the kind of the dream that we all want for Magento is that you have this omni-extensible platform that's easy for developers, it's easy for merchants, it's easy for SIs, and it's easy for us to sell. And that's a beautiful dream. I think, though, really the reality is that extensibility by nature is hard. We heard some of the friction, some of the challenges that Adobe faces with this addressed in the keynote. You know, Eric mentioned having to figure out how to maintain security on the platform when you have thousands of developers around the world working on it, and how you stop from introducing problems that no one intends, obviously, to break Magento's security. But you know, it could happen if there's not a WatchGuard in place, if you don't have some gates up. We also have to deal with compatibility. You know, as Magento and as Adobe necessarily move the product forward, things are going to change. But that means that things that we relied on when we built our system may no longer be the way that we liked them. Extensibility also comes with necessary domain knowledge. If we're working to extend Magento, I mean, I think we all know Magento's full of XML files. There's the DI XML file. There's your different layout XML files. Those all kind of constitute domain-specific language for the Magento product, and that's knowledge that we have to keep up with, and things that we have to train our staff in. And then the other thing that happens with extensibility is that when you start extending your extensions to your extensions to your extensions, you accidentally start introducing these lock-ins where maybe you're dependent on something that you have no control over. And that can cause friction and trouble as well. But there are things we can do. We can work smarter, not harder. So some things to keep in mind when we are working on our extensions. We want to be very mindful to never replace, always append. And what I mean by that is, for example, at Shipper HQ, we work in the checkout a lot. And, by nature, the checkout isn't always the most extensible part of an e-commerce platform because there's so much concern about security. There's so much concern about keeping that a fluid, frictionless process. And so, you want to make sure when you're working in in a platform, when you're working in Magento, it could be really easy to say, oh, well, this template isn't what I need, and it doesn't have what I need in it. So I'm going to just rewrite the template to include something that I need. But that has a couple of problems. One is that what happens when Adobe does an update and that template file gets changed on their side? Now we have to keep maintaining all of those upstream changes in our code. It also leads to problems with compatibility with other extensions and other modules in the system. So the more that we can try and never replace things, but just use the extensibility mechanisms, use the extension attributes, use JavaScript and Ajax and React if you're working in a PWA, and use those tools we have to always just inject just what we need, never more, just put enough to get to what you need, and then build off of that, and rely on your own APIs and your own additions as much as possible. And I have on there too, stick to the APIs. This has been an interesting thing from Shipper HQ's perspective. We've been working with Magento since the Magento 1 days, where things were kind of a wild west of extend everything, and then some of our code that's deployed in production today was written back during Magento 2.0, Magento 2.1, very early versions of Magento. And props to the Adobe team. They've put a lot of work and effort into making specific API boundaries now. But that's probably, I would say, not complete. I was having a conversation with someone from Adobe the other day, and we were talking about where are there other places that an API boundary is needed? Where are there other places where an extensibility layer is needed? And so as Adobe continues to move forward on kind of removing this extend everything and putting in clear reusable boundaries for us, we need to make sure we're keeping up with that and then we're moving our code onto it. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to be working on a bit of extensibility. And it's going to work and it's going to work and it's going to work. And then they're going to release an update and it's not going to work anymore. And so if we can keep up with those changes, moving our code onto these defined APIs rather than doing module overrides and things like that, then we're going to find that our extensions are easier to maintain, easier to work with. A general coding practice too is remember, few dependencies and shallow. And so what I mean by that is if, I think we all kind of came from the early on in the days of Magento 2, we all kind of thought, oh, dependency injection, I will just bring everything I need in on the constructor. And, it wasn't uncommon to see constructors with 20, 30 dependencies in it. And then we kind of realized, oh, well, now I've got a rat's nest and I can't test it and I can't upgrade it and I can't move it. So avoiding that kind of thinking, also avoiding doing overrides on your overrides, deep trees of inheritance cause a lot of interlinking and a lot of problems that you don't need in your code that are going to slow you down in the future. We do want to make sure we're we're adopting Magento service patterns. You know, again, kind of going back to, we used to kind of override everything, but Magento's doing a really good job. Adobe's doing a really good job of putting an actual service layer in, an actual service boundary there. So those are the points we want to connect into. We want to use plugins judiciously, so that we can make sure that our code, again, going back to the append don't replace, so that we're plugging into the code rather than replacing the code with something that we feel works better. And then two, we got to remember that anything that we can do in a general way, anything you can do that's in line with PHP best practices as opposed to Magento best practices, if it's not going to make if it's not going to be a problem for Magento, then we should always prefer to do the general thing. Because what that means is, as we bring staff on, as we move forward with the product, we'll be able to have a larger pool of information we can tap from. We'll be working in a space that we're more familiar with. So then there's another kind of dream for Magento. We would all love if our extensions were easy to test. And I think, you know, again, props to Adobe. They've moved the needle a lot on this lately, but the reality is still that it's tricky to work in a large platform, and it's tricky to test in a large platform. I think, you know, most of us have had experience with Magento does an upgrade. They move from PHP version X to PHP version Y. PHP unit, the testing framework, has kind of a policy of doing a different release for each PHP version, and that makes sense from their domain. But that means that now we've got an extension that we're trying to maintain compatibility across PHP versions, and our tests don't necessarily work in one platform version to another now. The other thing is that the Magento testing frameworks have their own domain-specific languages. So there are extensions on PHP unit that you need to use and understand in order to unit test your Magento code. There's the whole, you know, dependency injection is an unescapable thing in Magento. And so you need to understand how that works well enough to make sure your tests are working. You need to, if you choose to use the Magento functional testing framework, MFTF, that's literally got a DSL. There's a whole XML file format to know. And so we kind of run into these things when we're trying to test, and it can make it to where it's easy for a developer, especially a junior developer, to get frustrated and to say, you know, I know my code works. I don't have time to write this test, so we're going to go and we're going to ask questions later. So there are things, again, we can do. You're going to see this promoted throughout this talk. General knowledge is always better than domain knowledge. And when you apply that to testing, what that means is, rather than focusing on the Magento specific parts of our tests, rather than focusing on, how do I handle the dependency injector? How do I handle functional test framework, and teaching my team how to work in that? What we should be asking ourselves is saying, how can I use the skills I already have and bring those into Magento? So again, some of that comes down to our coding discipline. If we keep our dependency tree small, if we keep our inheritance shallow, it'll be easier to test. We want to look outside of Magento and what Adobe has provided some really great testing tooling, but it's overkill for a lot of situations. So we should look outside and say, is that the right tool for the job I'm trying to solve today? Or can I use a tool I've used before? And we can look at other communities. I know I've personally learned a huge amount of better testing practices and approaches just by being plugged into the front-end JavaScript community and the React communities. This helped me change my thinking to how I approach a test. And you want to focus on the ergonomics of your own team. And again, this is going to be stressed. This general knowledge and your team's ergonomics is going to be stressed through this entire presentation, because that's really what it comes down to. You need to do what is going to help your team move fast and help your product earn the money that it needs. And then, you know, there's of course some solutions out there. You know, a big shout out to Christoph. I think he's better known in some circles as Fu Man. He wrote the PHP unit bridge, which helps you manage like that PHP version problem we talked about earlier. And so, you know, we have these tools out there. We should be using them. I will say, you know, one specific thing, trying to be a little pragmatic here, that we found a lot of success in. We kind of looked at Magento functional test framework and we thought, you know, this is kind of daunting. It's a lot to take in. It's very specific. It doesn't transfer well across our team. So we thought, you know, why don't we try something new, or really something old, and let's try testing our Magento extension using Cypress. And so we've had a lot of success using Cypress as our test runner for end-to-end testing. And then we've got some Puppeteer scripts we kind of hacked together that can automate some of that, you know, account setup, the admin panel management, things like that, to make sure our tests are in a good state before they run. And that's been a beautiful thing for us, and it's helped us a lot. And it's leveraging the testing frameworks the rest of our team uses. So again, on that team ergonomics thing, by using the test suite that the rest of the team was using, now our Magento team is aligned and we can transfer that knowledge better. The next thing that's kind of dream, we would all love every merchant to stay on the latest edition of Magento at all times, right? It's faster, it's better, it's more secure, it's easier to work with. You know, the Adobe team moves mountains every release to make sure that we have a better DX than we did on the last release. And so we all want our merchants to stay up to date all the time. But the reality is that our merchants have their own priorities. You know, a merchant, I was talking to Thayer before the session started. You know, I used to work for a merchant. We did only 10% of the company revenue was online. So when they were using Magento, you know, they didn't need a new version. They didn't care if we didn't care if it was shiny. We didn't really care. My bosses didn't really care about my developer experience because it was 10% of the company revenue. The first priority for any merchant is economic. You know, they're selling product to make money. And the other thing to keep in mind is that everyone, like it or not, no matter how much we try and fight it, everyone has a sunk cost bias. And so a merchant who has spent thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars getting a store just the way they like it, doesn't want to hear that, well, in order to support you further, you need to spend another, you know, tens, hundreds, whatever it is, thousands of dollars to move to the latest Magento version. In many cases, the merchant will say, you know what, I'm going to accept my limitations, I'm going to take my risks, and I'm going to stay where I'm at. And that leads to, I know we see quite a few merchants in the wild that despite our best efforts, they're on out of support versions of Magento. And so you try and tell them to move, but you can't make them, and you don't really want to. They're doing what's best for their business. So we found, you know, there's not anything that you can do to fix that, to change that. It is what it is, and the merchants have good reasons for making those decisions. So the best thing that we found we can do is just to test early and test often, be ready for new releases, be ready for new versions, know what the differences are. We do have for our extension a supported version policy. So we used to be very fluid on this, but lately, the last few years, we follow pretty strictly Adobe's Adobe support table. So when a version of Magento is no longer supported by Adobe and no longer receiving security fixes, well, it's no longer getting bug fixes from us either. And, you know, that has caused friction with customers. We have had customers who said, well, you know, I needed this bug fixed. And we've said, well, we can't maintain that because we only have limited resources. And, you know, that's something you have to expect. You have to accept. That's something you have to decide for your own business what to do. If you have good testing in place, if you have good test automation, if you're tracking your tech debt, if you're using the upgrade compatibility tool and the other tooling, you can manage that, and maybe you can keep a version alive longer. But that is, you know, basically it's going to come down to, again, your team needs to have the discipline to say, this is what we are supporting, this is what we're not, and to put those tools in place to make sure that you're keeping track of the changes, and that you're able to support different versions, and that you're not manually QAing on 16 versions of Magento for every single release. I will say, you know, we maybe kind of in the past in our development environment, we kind of downplayed the importance of the PHP code sniffer of the Magento upgrade compatibility tool. And it hurt when we moved to Magento 2.4.4. So using those tools, using them using them liberally, making sure they're part of your pipelines, your workflows. Those things will pay dividends. It takes a little time to set up. It takes a little time to train your team, but it pays dividends in the long run. I will say, though, in the case of the Magento 2.4 upgrade specifically, none of those tools, funnily enough, none of those tools were ready for PHP 8.1 in that none of them caught the deprecations. PHP 8.1 had a lot of deprecated functionality that caused errors, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And none of those tools caught it. So we still had to do a little bit of manual work there. But had we had these tools in place, they would have pointed out quite a few other areas in our code that we could have improved to limit the blast radius on that. And that brings me to my next point. We all have the dream that every new PHP release right now, the buzz is around PHP 8.1, is going to be amazing. Kind of that Starship Enterprise, right? Oh, it's so much faster, so much better. And the reality is that new PHP versions are amazing, but there always has to be a but. They also break things. They're not a silver bullet, to use that phrase again. They're not going to solve everything. They're not a panacea. So in the case of PHP 8.1, it wasn't backwards compatible on certain features. The big one being if you pass null in on a string on a built-in function, the PHP team finally said, you know what, enough is enough. You can't do that anymore. And that would have been okay, except then Adobe, for security reasons, has the error reporting set to eAll. And so now what's happened is a PHP deprecation warning has escalated to a Magento fatal error. And that caused all sorts of havoc. So you have that to deal with. Composer packages. We found that quite a few composer packages that we were reliant on when we upgraded PHP versions, they had made backwards incompatibility changes in harmony with the move in PHP versions. And so we had to not just update our package, but we also had to update our code to use newer versions of their APIs. And the fact of the matter remains that until Magento 2.3.3 and prior, end of life, which is coming soon, we're still supporting. We still have to support Magento or PHP 7.3 and 7.4, and so that means all of the cool features of PHP 8.1 we want, having better type support and things like that. Well, we can't use them yet, so that kind of takes the edge off. PHP 8.1 did a lot for the language, but we don't get to use it just yet. We're kind of waiting on that final deprecation of the older PHP versions first. So again, the solution is going back to those fundamentals, right? Test early, test often. We got caught off guard because we weren't watching the Magento release schedule, and we didn't know we needed to support that version of PHP 8.1 as soon as we did. And so, we've put that process in place now. We are testing the early access releases. We're testing the beta releases to make sure that we're staying up to date. We had found that some of our composer dependencies had fallen behind, and we needed to update those because we just weren't watching and it was working. We're investing further in test automation. We're keeping better track of our tech debt. And what I mean there is when we're going into our code and we're saying, oh, this works now, but it won't work later. Or, oh, this is a piece of code that doesn't follow Magento's newest best practices. We're opening JIRAs for those. We're opening tickets for those. We might not work on them right away, but we have them captured so that when it does come time to address it, then we've got that information ready to go for us, and we've got an estimate. We know what it's going to take. And then the other thing is to remember, like we said, we still have to support, at least in our business use case, we still have to support PHP 7.3. So we're trying to adopt as much of PHP 8 syntax and new features as we can. But at the same time, we're not going to rewrite code that's worked for 5 years. We're not going to rewrite code that doesn't have an issue in it and is doing just fine. And we can't use all of PHP 8's features. So we have to find the balance for our team. What's ergonomic? Again, going back to that term, what's ergonomic for our team to make sure that we are staying ahead of the curve as much as we can without putting undue amounts of effort into parts of the system that no one is going to appreciate that effort. So kind of the takeaways, and then we'll have some Q&A. Your team's ergonomics always come first. You're working with a platform, but the platform's there to enable you. If you find that the platform's tooling isn't sufficient, then ask yourself, should I use a different tool with this platform? In our case, that was the testing system. We said, you know what, what's best for us is Cypress, and we just made it work. And that's been great for us. Don't expect perfection from Adobe. They've got too many people that they're trying to please, and they're doing the best they can. So we're going to have to deal with some of these things on our end, and we can do a lot just by kind of putting our systems in place. Plan now for your issues. Like I said, track those things. If you don't have time to work on them, at least capture them so you can estimate them, so you can understand them for the future. Do invest time in your maintenance. Don't let things sit like like I have in a few cases of letting things go for 5-6 years, being like, oh, the code works, I don't need to look at it. Well, someday it won't work. And kind of remember, the perfect platform doesn't exist, but Magento is still a pretty sweet place to be. It's a good platform to work on. They're doing a lot for us, and so we need to do our part then to make sure that we take the rest of that burden on. I think got time for questions if anyone has them. I'm watching chat. I did see, people saying they second Cypress and they second the reality of this talk. I am on Twitter. I should have highlighted that. Trav Byrne is my Twitter handle. So if you want to talk more in depth on some of these things, I moved fast through some of it. I stayed high level on some of it because, like I said, every team is different. Yeah, thanks, Willem. Feel free to DM me or even let's talk in public. Hit me up on Twitter. We can talk. We can get pragmatic and get specific on some of these things. All right. Well, if no one's got any questions, I want to say thank you to everybody for attending. Hopefully you found it helpful. I think there's I see some questions are coming in. Okay, good. But hopefully this helps your team's mindset around Magento. It is a tool, and it is there to enable us. And sometimes it doesn't enable us the way we want, but that doesn't mean it's blocking us either. I see a question. Any suggestions to automate the process to keep the scan on tech debt? Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that we're working on, I don't have a specific example yet, but one thing we are working on is getting the upgrade compatibility tool that Adobe provides into our CI/CD pipeline, so that we'll get reports. So when a new version of Magento is released, you can start running the tool against the beta version, saying, okay, what are my problems coming down the line? Similar with PHP Code Sniffer, if you've got that in your pipeline, you can start saying, okay, what are the things that are warnings today that might advance into being errors tomorrow? And honestly, we haven't found a better solution than just good old-fashioned human brains. Your engineers know what they don't like working on. Your engineers know what's difficult and what's kind of gnarly. And so as they hit those things, we've kind of tried to enable our team to say, hey, look, we've got a label in Jira that they can apply to a ticket, and they're open to open a ticket in the backlog and put that on it and tag it with that label. And the human approach has been the most effective at finding that tech debt, because when we're working on something and we say, oh, this kind of sucks to work on, then we just open a ticket and then it's captured for later. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Zach. Tech debt isn't just code quality, it is architecture. So sometimes I know we have a lot of this in our extension. Like I said, it's been around since Magento 2.0 days. So there's a lot of decisions that were the right decision then. They're not the right decision now. And those things, if they still work, we might not tackle them just yet, but by identifying them, we'll be ready when we do need to address them.
All right, it looks like we're at time. I want to thank everyone for coming to our session here. Thanks, Travis. I sure learned a lot, and I'm sure the rest of us did as well. We do have some other sessions coming up that you can navigate to with the sessions button in the sidebar on the left-hand side of your screen. The next session we have is the committee updates. We have a few different speakers presenting updates about the Magento Association as a whole, so I'd encourage you all to check that out. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the MA Connects Spring 2022 event. Thanks for coming and have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.